Researchers call this continuous traumatic stress. It's different than PTSD, which orients toward a past event. Because for survivors of ongoing abuse, the threat doesn't end when you leave, it transforms. The abuse continues through different channels, and nobody wants to talk about it. There's something that happens to a lot of women when they finally leave an emotionally abusive marriage and walk into the family court system. They go in with hope. They go in believing that someone, a judge, a lawyer, the process itself will finally see that they've been living through hell. And then something quietly devastating happens. The system that was supposed to protect them starts to look a lot like the marriage that they were leaving. Today, we need to talk about that because the research is clear and the stories are consistent. And I keep hearing them over and over. Too many women are walking into one of the most important processes of their lives completely unprepared for what actually is going to happen. And the bravery it's taken to get them there is tremendous. So I want to cover 3 things today. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Leslie Mathews. I'm a therapist, a relationship support and coach, and I specialize in also helping women go through divorce, decide if they want to go through divorce, and also adjust to life after divorce. I hear stories over and over again about what this system is like, what it's like to go into these meetings. Even in a collaborative situation, I experienced my own trauma. And also what I hear over and over is that the women going in and the men are not prepared for what they're walking into. Or maybe their lawyers don't have time. Maybe they don't want to pay their lawyers for the time to prepare. But what unfolds needs to be discussed. So I'm going to cover 3 things today. First, what trauma actually does to your nervous system when you've been in a high conflict or emotionally abusive marriage, because this matters more than most people realize when you're talking about walking into a courtroom. Second, I want to talk about how the legal system currently fails women in this situation. And this is documented, peer-reviewed research, not just personal opinion. And third, I want to talk about what helps. What actually helps? What changes the experience? What prepares you for this in a way that protects your mind, your body, your case, and your kids, if you have them? This is not a hopeless conversation. I want to be clear. It is, in places, a hard one, but you deserve the truth of what you're walking into so that you can walk through it differently. And that's the takeaway here. The takeaway is it doesn't have to be this terrible. There are ways to prepare the same way you prepare for turbulence on a plane when you know it's coming. So let's start with talking about the nervous system, because I think this is a piece that people least expect to hear about in a legal context. And it's probably the thing that lawyers are the least trained in, all right? But it's probably the most important. When you've been living inside an emotionally abusive relationship, your nervous system has been doing something remarkable. It's been adapting. Every time you learned to anticipate your partner's mood shifts, every time you modified your behavior to avoid conflict, every time you walked on eggshells, your brain and your body were doing the work of survival. They were calibrating to an environment that required constant vigilance. That's not weakness, that's biology. This is what the human nervous system does. It protects us. But here's what that means by the time you arrive into the divorce process. Your nervous system is still in that mode. Researchers call this continuous traumatic stress. It's different than PTSD, which orients toward a past event. Because for survivors of ongoing abuse, the threat doesn't end when you leave, it transforms. The abuse continues through different channels, and nobody wants to talk about it, but your body knows it. Researchers have found that roughly 20% of people leaving high conflict or abusive marriages meet the full diagnostic criteria for PTSD. And for those who have experienced what research has called coercive control, which is a pattern of emotional manipulation, isolation, financial restriction, surveillance, and intimidation, the psychological wound can be even more complex. This is what clinicians now often identify as complex PTSD. It affects not just your emotional responses, but your sense of self, your ability to trust your own perception, and your capacity to regulate under stress. And here's where this gets critically important for your legal situation. The 4 trauma responses, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, do not turn off when you enter a courtroom. A freeze response can look like you can't recall facts clearly. A fawn response, which is the impulse to appease and accommodate that develops from years of doing exactly that to survive, can lead you to agree to terms that are unfair just to stop the conflict, just to get out. A fight response, when triggered, can make you appear hostile or unstable to a judge who doesn't understand what they're witnessing. And the person across the aisle from you, who is often very skilled at appearing calm, may not have any of this happening in their body at all because they were the one running the dynamic, not surviving it. This isn't a fair fight on a level playing field, and the system, by and large, doesn't understand that yet. So let's talk about how the system fails survivors who are so bravely showing up to get out. Let me share some of what the research actually shows, because this is not anecdotal. A major scoping review published in 2024 found that mothers who had experienced domestic or family violence engaging with the family court system actively made their trauma symptoms worse, not better, and that those psychological impacts were long-lasting. A UK report from the Domestic Abuse Commissioner found that 89% of domestic abuse survivors received no support when going through the family court proceedings. One survivor described it this way, and I want to read this carefully because it captures something really important. The family court process has left me more severely traumatized than the domestic violence itself. I was belittled, undermined, exposed to my abusive ex repeatedly, and I've never been more frightened and alone in my life. How is this happening? A few key mechanisms. The first is what researchers call litigation abuse. This is when the legal process itself becomes the tool of control. Your abuser, who is often practiced at appearing reasonable and charming to outsiders, can use repeated court filings, excessive discovery requests, prolonged delays, and financial attrition to continue the very pattern of coercive control that the legal system was supposed to interrupt. They were supposed to protect you. The second is high conflict label. When a divorce is labeled high conflict, it carries an implicit assumption that both parties are equally responsible for the conflict. Research is quite clear. This is often not the case. That what looks like mutual conflict is frequently one person's coercive control pattern continued post-separation. But when that label is applied, it erases the power differential. It makes you and your abuser look equivalent. The third is something that's harder to talk about, but important. What happens to your credibility when your trauma is visible? I think of Gabby Petito every time I think of this and every time I hear about it. Studies have found that trauma responses like hypervigilance, emotional shutdown, panic, tearfulness are frequently misread by family court professionals as signs of instability or untrustworthiness. Meanwhile, an abuser who has had decades of practice appearing calm and composed is perceived as rational and stable. The very skills that help them control you are the same skills that make them look good in front of the judge. This is a systemic failure of training and framework. It's not about individual bad actors. It's a system that was built around the premise of two roughly equal parties in a neutral dispute, applied to a situation that's anything but that. And one more thing that needs to be named. In far too many cases, a protective mother's attempts to shield her children from an abusive parent gets reframed as parental alienation, which can actually harm her custody standing. The family court system has a documented history of misapplying parental alienation theory in ways that further endanger the survivors and their children. This is not what people expect. They went to court to get out and get their children out of a harmful situation, and the system is working against them. But we can breathe. What do we do with all of this information? Because this is not where the story has to end. There are things that genuinely change the experience, and they need to begin before you're sitting in front of a judge, not after. And this is partially your attorney's responsibility to prepare you for, or to make sure you get support to prepare you for, through therapy or coaching. The first thing you need is nervous system preparation. I did not enter a courtroom. I was in a room doing a collaborative divorce, and my nervous system was a mess. I dissociated. I froze. I wanted to flee. And I was in a very controlled environment that's not already intimidating like a courtroom. So I'm not talking about nervous system preparation in vague self-care language. I'm talking about functional preparation for one of the most stressful processes of your life. Learning to regulate hyperactivated stress response through somatic therapy, breath work, mindfulness, body-based practices. Those might not mean anything to you yet, but once you have those tools in your toolbox, they will mean everything to you. It expands what we clinicians call your window of tolerance. Window of tolerance is a space in which you can think clearly. You can still access your memory. You can speak coherently and make decisions that come from your values rather than your fear. You are not trying to eliminate emotion. You're trying to stay present enough to access your own thinking when it matters most. EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing is one of the most researched and effective therapies for this kind of trauma. It is what got me through my divorce, and then some. Not only did it get me through, it got me to the other side, a healthier version of myself. I can't recommend it enough. As a tool you're using with a therapist during the divorce process, literally having that therapist on speed dial when you need it. Somatic experiencing is a whole nother tool. Even consistent breath work and grounding practices can begin to shift the nervous system that has been running on threat for years. The second thing I would like everyone going through this to do is to understand the pattern. Women who can name coercive control, who understand it, who understand the financial abuse, who understand what litigation abuse looks like and why it happens, enter the process with a framework that's different and better. And that framework is protective. It means that when your abuser's attorney tries to redefine your reality in that room, because they will, you have language for what's happening. You're not confused. You expect it and anticipate it. You're watching a familiar move be played in a new arena, but you're prepared this time. The third thing is documentation. Early and organized documentation. Coercive control is a pattern, and patterns require evidence over time. Text messages, emails, financial records, behavioral changes in your children, witnessed incidents, documented medical visits. All of this forms part of the picture that you're going to need. Building this record proactively with guidance is substantially different from trying to reconstruct it in the heat of proceedings, which, just trust me, you're not going to have time for. The fourth thing, this is perhaps the most significant, is the quality of the support team that you have around you. Research is consistent. Survivors who have informed, dedicated support through the family court process have better outcomes. Not just legal support, human support. Someone who understands the trauma responses and can help you interpret what's happening in your own body and in the room. Someone who can help you prepare for difficult conversations without dysregulating. Someone who can hold the steadiness that your nervous system needs in order to access its own clarity. A trauma-informed therapist or coach who also understands the legal landscape is not a luxury. For women navigating a high-conflict divorce from abusive marriages, it may be one of the most protective resources available, because the law will provide and proceed at its own pace. The system will not slow down to ask you if you're okay. Neither will a judge. The hearings will happen whether your nervous system is regulated or not. And what determines so much of the outcome is not just what you have on paper. It's how you present and how you show up and are able to be in the moment that matters. So there is hope. I know I'm speaking firmly, but there is hope. It is your responsibility before this process starts to put the people in place to protect you and to train you and teach you and prepare you. And you can't, unfortunately, rely on your attorney to do that. The feedback I get from many, many, many women is that that support is not available to them from their attorney, either because they don't want to pay for the attorney to provide it, or because attorneys just don't provide it, even female attorneys. You're not broken because this is hard. You're responding rationally to a process that was not designed with your experience in mind. It wasn't designed to prevent trauma. The research is really clear that the system fails survivors at scale. It's a systemic problem, and it needs systemic reform. But while that work is in progress, you do not have to enter it unprepared. What changes things is not luck or a good judge. It's preparation. Emotional, strategic, and relational preparation. It's understanding what you've been through, naming it clearly, and having someone in your corner who sees both the complexity of your trauma and the realities of your legal situation. That's what we do with the Loom Life. Other people do it too. There are many wonderful coaches out there and therapists who specialize in divorce. So if this conversation resonated with you, if you're in the middle of this process, you're approaching it, you want support that holds both emotional and practical space, I would love to talk to you. If I can't help you or I'm not the right fit for you, I can help you find someone who can. It means that much to me that women are getting the support that they need. That's why I created the Loom Life. That's why I am a former attorney, now therapist, who is coaching women. The link to book a call is in the description of this episode. Come have a conversation with me. You do not have to walk through this alone. There's also a community of women going through this, with a community with resources available to them. There are support systems out there, and I can help you find the one that fits best for you. I see you. I'm here with you. If you're in the beginning of this, get your support system now, because your experience doesn't have to be traumatizing, and you don't have to be unprepared. Sending you so much love and light. I hope this episode helps and gives you a path forward that is much, much easier than the women who've gone before you.